Here we go.
Yeah.
So I am here today. This is Councilmember Jay Schenirer, and thank you for joining us. This is about our fifth or sixth week that we've been doing a live show with some influential person here in Sacramento, or multiple people. Today we have Maya Wallace. Usually I do start off with a little recap of what happened at the council meeting last night, but since we're on recess for 2 weeks, I don't have that. Let's go directly to Maya, and who has been involved in many, many things in the city. So, Maya, could you just do maybe a little bit of a bio about yourself and how you're involved and why you think you're on this show today?
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Jay. I'm Maya Wallace, and I like to say that I'm a 19-year transplant to Sacramento because I feel like you don't get to be a native until, well, you don't get to be one unless you are one in some ways. But Sacramento is definitely my adoptive hometown. I was originally born in St. Louis, Missouri, and I grew up in Southern California. But my dad will tell you that I really like Sacramento because it reminds me of St. Louis, and it definitely, in my mind, deserves its moniker as the Midwest of California. Why do I think I'm on the show because I have been engaged in a lot of different projects related to the city for the last decade or so. I first got involved with the city's redistricting committee back in 2011. Was not a binding process the way it is today. I'm very interested in seeing how the 2020 census and the subsequent redistricting shakes out for Sacramento and everywhere in California. And then after that, I have been working on, let's see. I've worked on some city council campaigns and some mayoral campaigns. And I've also been on the board of Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocates, working on getting more bike lanes and access for folks in outlying parts of the city, as well as in Midtown and downtown. I've been an equity champion for a long time in a number of domains. Also have worked on homelessness and housing issues in the city and the county. And most recently, I have been serving on the Arts Commission. Was until very recently the Sacramento Metropolitan Arts Commission, and it was a city-county body. And through the last 3 years, we have engaged in a cultural planning process, the creation of a cultural equity statement, and we have dissolved the Sacramento Metropolitan Arts Commission and constituted the commission as a city-only commission, and I am the vice chair of that commission right now. And I was also vice chair last year of the old commission. So I've been really focused on making sure that we get a arts ecosystem that's inclusive for the city and all of the artists here, and that we are investing in our arts organizations that serve parts of our city that haven't necessarily gotten the same attention over the years as the major marquee organizations. And then also just really want to make sure that all of the arts in Sacramento are well funded because I think they're really important for people's sense of belonging. And so it's really important to me that everyone feels represented and welcome.
Great. So you've seen, we'll kind of jump into this now. You've seen the city from lots of different angles.
Yeah.
And let me say thank you for your commitment to Sacramento. I mean, if everyone put as much time and effort into the city as you, we'd be a different place. But it's important to have advocates for the city and who are pushing us always to do the right things. So let's start with kind of the big question. I think if we go pre-COVID and post-COVID.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Pre-COVID, were we moving along the right pathways? And then post-COVID, post George Floyd, I don't think you can separate those two the timing of those two.
Yeah.
Then how are we doing now? Let's start with were we on the right track when all this happened? And then let's talk a little bit about where we are now and what the challenges we face are. But most importantly, for the city, what should we be doing?
So were we on the right track pre-COVID? I felt that largely we were. I think, I work in government and I actually work in accountability. I'm an internal auditor, and I've been an external auditor for the state auditor's office. And so the city of Sacramento is struggling with a lot of the same challenges that most municipal governments struggle with, like pensions and salaries, and whether or not our tax base is sufficient to fund the services that we really want to provide to the community. I think that the reorganization of several departments in the city was really a great idea. The youth and parks, community enrichment sort of focus, the youth commission's elevation. I haven't delved into it like really deeply, but I appreciate the sort of youth through line that's been put in place for the city. And I liked the accountability they were trying to build into the Measure U funding and that commission, and really focusing on inclusive economic development. So in that regard, I think the city was doing a really good job, and I actually like the way that it was shaking out. It was a little different. I remember like maybe 3 years ago, we started with this idea of Project Prosper, and that felt a little forced and maybe that we hadn't done the groundwork to include the community in those conversations to begin with. And so I felt like the Inclusive Economic Development Council and the Measure U committee were much better ways for people to have ongoing contact with the process. And I think that's sort of, if I had to say there's something that's sort of like a challenge for Sacramento, and I think it's a challenge everywhere, it's building meaningful structures and methods of communication for communities. I think that's really challenging. I think the nature of bureaucracy is to be insular. And so I think that that's one of our big challenges going forward. So post COVID and George Floyd uprising, and sort of we have to reconfigure our many elements of our society at this point, because there just isn't going to be the same divisions of labor that there have been. And I sort of look at everything as like a post World War II kind of structure. I always feel like we built jobs, and maybe it's like depression to World War II or something, but we built all these structures for people to kind of fit into, and we have been neglecting that. And I think that it goes back to my sense of how we need to have a sense of belonging and feel like we're part of community. What's his name, Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone and the Decline of Civic Institutions. We haven't really built up new civic institutions that take the place of the ones that he sort of charts as falling out of favor, like Elks and churches and bowling leagues, right? I don't know what the 21st century versions of those are that create the same kinds of cohesion, that I think that's really what we need to think about right now. And it's really challenging because we're in this very contentious space, right? There's lots of people who are really angry. I think they like the sense of camaraderie that they develop in their advocacy efforts, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how local governments in general sort of learn how to work with folks in that space.
So if we go back for a second, what I heard you, we kind of need our own Marshall Plan. If we go back to the World War II analogy, how do we rebuild or build our infrastructure, rebuild it where it needs to be rebuilt? And I do think we were going along those lines, looking at our urban corridors, looking at the neighborhoods who needed it most, really talking about inclusive economic development. And so you had all these pieces that were starting to really be put in place. And thanks for bringing up the piece around our young people. I mean, they definitely have been, left out of a lot of the conversation. And I think we're really trying to engage them in an authentic way. The joint meeting that we had with the Youth Commission and the City Council was really, to me, a historic event that we're able to put these young people on par with us. We could never have done it without Zoom, just because of the sheer numbers. So, there's a little bit of a silver lining. But I thought the young people that presented had done their homework and had really good suggestions, many of which we adopted, and told us what was on their minds. And like any other community that we work with, we shouldn't be doing to them, we should be doing with them. And I think young people are no different. My anecdote is, every year when we have the summer at City Hall, young people come and present to the City Council. Everyone is so astonished at the quality of their work. And my feeling is the metric is when we're not astonished and we take it for granted that it's going to be that high quality, then we'll have actually gotten somewhere. And I just did the same thing. We have a youth leadership academy at SACOG at the Council of Governments, and they just presented, and their work was just fabulous. These were basically high school juniors and seniors. So we need to keep working on that. But anyway, so if we leave it, I think we were doing good. We were doing some reorganization, as you said, around parks, really trying to build up our capacity around economic development, and a lot of other things. And then, boom, we have COVID, and then you have so how would you? Let me just ask, how are we doing now? I mean, we're struggling with the $1 million. We're struggling with our budget. Everywhere you turn, there's a huge challenge. And really for me too, and others, how do you balance those and how do you prioritize?
Right. Obviously, I think,
for you.
just how do you solve all the world's problems? I think there's a couple of things. I think there's a sense the level of challenges are overwhelming. The level of response is strong. And we're really fortunate that we got that recovery relief money from the feds. I think that one of the things I think that we struggle with, and this goes back to your thing about a Marshall Plan, is communicating a structured approach to solving a problem. I was recently watching one of these actually on StreamYard. Jackie Cole has a consulting company, Veritable Good, and she's been doing these convenings called Lift Every Voice. And she's had one on arts, and she's had one on food, and she just had one that Paul Willis moderated with youth activists. And Jassol Amaru said, one of the things we struggle with in government is making change apparent to youth. And I thought that was like the most insightful thing. And I was also, just like everyone else, blown away by how articulate and like insightful all these like 17, 18-year-olds were. And, it's just a different world, and they really do have so many more resources, and they've really taken advantage of them. But I think that we are doing the right things in terms of focusing on making sure that families are fed, that everyone has shelter. I think we struggle to push when there's obstruction. For instance, people want to know, why aren't more homeless people housed, right? And obviously that's a really difficult issue to resolve. I tried it myself. And so I understand that there's a lot of moving parts, and people don't want to hear those excuses anymore. And so I don't know if that just requires more creative thinking or if it requires more money. I'm excited to see what happens with the $5 million for tiny homes. I hope we can get those up and running quickly. But also, I think we need to turn the people we're serving into ambassadors. I think that might help people feel like things are moving more quickly and efficiently. I think that's also part of the issue. And then I think it's just a balance. We have a tendency to promote the core because that's what we've been doing and investing in for the last decade as an economic engine for the city that we recognize that we need to sustain. And I think we need to kind of do the same thing and tell those same stories in other parts of the city so that it feels like a rising tide is lifting all boats, or at least keeping us all afloat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. I mean, there's certainly a balancing act there. And I don't want to be defensive about the city, but we're doing a lot of things that we've never done before. We never dealt with homeless issues. It was really a county responsibility, and that's how the funding, flew. I think we've done a good job trying to attack it. We have a long way to go. I mean, it's a huge issue. I still, even with everything else going on, probably other than defund the police, I get more calls about and more real, authentic calls around homelessness. There's an encampment down the block from me, or an encampment 25W. Can you go fix that? So, we're trying to do that. I think we've housed over 850 people in the motels that we've put up, and we've done that quietly. I think the businesses around them don't want it advertised nearly as much, but we've had really very few, if any, problems with that. We put up the structures in District 2 for youth. I think that'll take 48 young people. We're going to do what the mayor and Steve and Alan put out on Monday to try to do that. We're building on Meadowview. We're trying to build under the WX. I mean, we're having problems with the federal government on that one. So we have this response, and now, tangential to that, we're starting to work a lot more in the mental health field, particularly around young people. We can talk about that a little bit, but in some ways, we're becoming a social service agency and duplicating what the infrastructure that the county has. And I'm not sure that's the best long-term solution, but I don't know how we wait.
Yeah, I understand, and I share, the frustrations related to that. I often find myself in the position of defending the city and saying,
Thank you.
we've added a ton of stuff we never used to do. That's not our purview. It's literally not our jurisdiction. And I'm actually doing Wonk Wednesday tonight with Phil Cerna.
Oh, great.
And I don't intend to put him on the spot, but I am curious. Like, I'm not sure that counties work anymore.
Yeah.
And that's no offense to counties. But I think there's this expectation because people are way more engaged. You probably know about this, the idea of stealth democracy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like that was like I was taught by people who believed that, and I was like, I don't believe that. I'm going to change that. And I think people my age and younger have very much like wanted to be more engaged in the process of government. And so
how do we do that? Because I think that's really important. And kind of as an example, I think you went through the City Academy as well.
I did, and planning and management. Yeah.
Right. So once people do that, I think they get a pretty different vision or view of the city government and what they do and how hard people work there. How do you facilitate that conversation? Because again, where we started, I said, until we know people's stories, we're never going to get anywhere. And until we understand what people are doing and why they're doing it, I think it's going to be really, really difficult. So, and I'm not sure how you have that conversation with people, or if they even want it.
Well, I'm encouraged, and I hope that the Artists in Residence program that the Arts Commission is doing in conjunction with Parks is a form that we could explore more fully, right? Because I think that it's really, and I was also really encouraged by the Neighborhood Development Action Team sort of proposal, and I'm not sure where we are with that. But I think the city needs a whole entire department devoted to outreach and engagement. And I think that if people felt like there were ways to plug in and be heard and see directly sort of their impact or something change as a result of their involvement, um, they might be less frustrated, right? Like something we study in, sort of the behavioral side of public administration is like, how do we deal with wait times? and yeah, I mean, we're dealing with, like, obviously you want to meet the most urgent needs first, and that's sort of why my question about counties is, what can we do to make counties feel more responsive? Because like they are dealing with the human services issues,
Right.
which are really urgent for folks.
And I will say, I think we've come a long way. I think there was a lot of tension between the city and the county. I think we've worked really well on Operation Turnkey, which are the hotels and some other things.
Yeah, I understand like all of the issues, right? Like bureaucrats are averse to conflict, really, not really change, but conflict. So
we've always done it this way, or we tried that and it didn't work.
yeah, so. And there's a lot of that too. Like we did try that and it did not work, and you think you know what you're talking about, but like this is my profession, right?
Well, maybe let's talk about the arts a little bit. So how do you see Sacramento moving forward on that? We have a report that I know you participated in, and where are we?
So we did the cultural plan, and it is fully integrated into the processes that the commission uses to design grant programs and let's see, and to distribute funds, which I think is a real accomplishment for Sacramento. We have a cultural equity investment grant that focuses directly on nonprofit organizations that serve communities that have been underserved and that we have not invested in. And we are basically building the capacity of those organizations in the same ways that we have built the capacity of the big arts nonprofits in the past, like the ballet and the Philharmonic and like Broadway Sacramento and stuff like that. And so I think we're on the right path. I think we need more access to venues, and I think that we need a lot more I don't know, arts and cultural amenities in the neighborhoods that people feel like they have connection to. And I don't know if that means we spend the same kinds of funds that we've spent on the core everywhere. But I do sort of think that people want full service, like neighborhoods everywhere. Yeah. So I think that that's definitely part of it. I don't know, though, how we get there when we sort of designed a process that was based on a government funding structure that may not ever return.
Yeah. Well, I'm hopeful that in a year to year and a half, we'll be back to something that looked like normal for us, and that Measure U funds will come back to the purposes for which they were passed. One of the things that I've talked a little bit about at council meetings when we've talked about some of the CARES money and the federal stimulus money is if we're giving money to arts organizations and we're also trying to give money to work with school districts and young people, how do we make those two come together as much as possible? We know even in the mental health field, young people that did their own surveys said mental health was the #1 issue among young people. Because it's been there before, but COVID has just exponentially made it worse. And we know arts, there are places where arts are being used to help young people with their mental health issues. Yeah. So I'm hoping that, through the work that you do on the commission, we can really push that to integrate to the extent possible, not for every artist or whatever, but really bringing that to young people.
I agree. I think it's critical. I know not all young people apparently like all young people like arts, and it's not true that like people, there was like, I'm not an arts guy, and I was like, well, you were once, like you like music, like
still enjoyed it,
yeah, right. Like you didn't necessarily get up there and do it yourself, but like I can't think of like I know I can think of like three people in my life who have been said they don't like movies or music or shows. Like that's the people like that stuff. So it's definitely worth investing in.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
great.
but yeah, and I you're right. Hopefully things do sort of come back, but we also have an opportunity right now to reevaluate what we emphasize going forward and like how we fund and then like who we empower in those conversations. That we were kind of maybe on autopilot about that before, so I think the pause is not a bad thing.
So on the money front, if somebody gave you $50 million and said, "Here, go spend this in the city," what would you do
Yeah.
with it? What would be your
uh
priority?
Gosh, well, I would capitalize every small nonprofit that's working in community for sure. And then I would take a bunch to the communities that we kind of talk about as being challenging and like that we don't really understand how to catalyze them. And I would find the grass tops people in those communities and I would ask them what they needed. And I would empower and sort of maybe corral everyone else towards those goals. I think if we really did that, it would be pretty impressive. There's lots of opportunity for beautification. Obviously, there's the chance to like upgrade people's homes, like weatherizing and all that kind of good stuff. And then just sort of conversations about what they want to see, right? It's whatever they want. Sky's the limit. We're not driving anymore. We can retake the streets. Like,
Traffic seems to be getting worse and worse, so I think people
I
are
think
back.
that I think driving is getting worse. I don't know about like traffic. But I mean, we don't have to. Every street doesn't have to have 1,000 cars on it all the time. So that's space that we can use.
Yeah,
And I think I was really hopeful. That was one of the things I was really hopeful that we would have done when we were trying to figure out how to slow streets and stuff, and the farm to fork al fresco, but also just sort of lighter, quicker, cheaper infrastructure in different communities that we haven't really done. No street closures.
not yet. We'll get there. There's so
Yeah.
much on the plate, and we're trying to do so much. Sometimes it's difficult, to be honest.
Hmm.
So the last question, which I told you I was going to ask,
Yeah.
is if we traded places and you were on the council, and what I didn't tell you before, but we'll make it easy for you. You had four. You had four other votes.
Oh,
So
okay.
you got 5 votes. You got a majority of the council to do one or two things next Tuesday night.
Okay. What would I do? Gosh. You know what? I think it's going back to communication for me. So I would either create that department of community engagement, and then embed people in the community and actually like hire people from those communities, pay them to do that outreach and engagement. Um, and within that, I would have them develop a set of metrics for each of those communities that they want to see change, and then we would measure that and report on it every month, every quarter, something like that. And I think that would be a way for people to sort of engage and see change that affected them directly happening in their communities.
Great. All right. Well, let's work on that together. I think it's.
Okay.
Yeah. I know we're going to be creating a new department with what we take away from police. I think the other important conversation we need to have around public safety is really how do you define it? Because to me, it's not just response time for fire and number of policemen or police people per 1,000 residents. We need to think about the health and safety of communities and what that looks like and how we get there.
Yeah.
So I
And I
just,
think also, Jay, I think people want to take care of each other,
yeah,
and I think we can just empower them to do that because they've been doing it. I'm really impressed with a lot of what's been happening lately.
No, I totally agree. I think, Sacramentans, I always say this, when there's a crisis, we stand up and support each other.
Yeah.
So we're losing a little bit of that now because things are so contentious, but I think we will definitely get back to it. So I am going to end this. I actually have to go to the Sacramento Transportation Authority meeting.
Oh, have fun.
We're going to talk about November today.
Oh,
And
yeah.
want to do a tax, which probably not. But again, I want to thank you both for coming on today, but more importantly, for all that you do for Sacramento. It's so important to have people who care that much. So thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Stay safe. Take care.
I will. You too. Take care.